Good morning, folks. This coming weekend is the sixth Sunday of Easter. The Gospel reading is very brief. I'm going to read it for you. From the Gospel of St. John, Jesus said to his disciples, "Whoever loves me will keep my word. My Father will love him. We will come to him and make our dwelling with him. Whoever does not love me does not keep my words, yet the word you hear is not mine, but that of the Father who sent me. I've told you this while I'm still with you. The Advocate, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, he will teach you everything and remind you of all that I've told you. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. Not as the world gives it, do I give it to you. Do not let your hearts be troubled or afraid. You've heard me tell you, I am going away and I will come back. If you love me, you would rejoice that I'm going to my Father, for the Father is greater than I. And now I've told you this before it happens, so that when it happens, you may believe." As I mentioned, this is chapter 14 of St. John. Actually, chapter 13 obviously precedes chapter 14, but it's sort of gives you the last prayer of Jesus. And in chapter 13, we had Jesus washing the feet of his disciples, reminding them, of course, that just as he washed their feet, they have the responsibility to be foot washers in relationship to other people. Then after the foot washing, we have Judas actually betraying Jesus, which in a sense was had to be a very disturbing event as far as the disciples were concerned. And then that in turn is followed by Jesus saying that about Peter, that he will deny Jesus three times before the cock crows. Three times, before he crows, he will deny him three times. So that's sort of the background to chapter 14, and in chapter 14, Jesus is obviously, by now the disciples are sort of shaken. They know that things are sort of heading in the wrong direction. That Jesus has been betrayed by Judas, and etc. That has moved. The Jewish opposition seems to be gathering against Jesus. So, sort of in that context, in this reading, he reminds them. He said, like, for example, do not let your hearts be troubled or afraid. Well, obviously they probably are very, very troubled and very afraid. And also he reminds them that to love him, just if they keep his word, they will love him, and if they don't keep his word, then obviously they're not loving him. But he's trying to prepare them. He's trying to prepare them for the end, and it's in the midst of that he reminds them. He says, "I've told you this while I'm still with you. The Advocate, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, he will teach you everything and remind you of all that I've told you." So this is the first mention of the fact that he is going, his end is coming, that he's going to leave them, but he's not going to leave them alone. That the Advocate, meaning the Spirit, will be with them for all time. So that, in a sense, prepares them for the fact that even though things are heading in the wrong direction as far as Jesus is concerned, that they will not be alone. That there will be power. They will receive power from on high. So that, in a sense, is the first real mention of the Holy Spirit. And I think what we're going to find is that we're moving into, as we head toward the death and resurrection of Jesus, we're also moving into what we call the era of the Holy Spirit. And in a sense, that takes us to the Gospel reading for Sunday, which in a sense it seems sort of strange, because it doesn't demand anything of us. It's just telling us what actually happened. But it's really part of the story of the first council of the church, which actually happened in Jerusalem. Jerusalem was the head of the church up until probably the end of the first century, and from that time onwards it was Rome. But while it was still the head, while it was this event, chapter 15 of the Acts of the Apostles took place around the year 50. So it's in Jerusalem, and sort of the context is that Jerusalem is the head of the church, and this is the first council that they have to deal with one of the sort of first controversies or difficulties in the church. And to understand that controversy, of course, you have to keep in mind that in the Acts of the Apostles, you have two major leaders: Peter first in the first half, and Paul in the second half. And Peter in the first half, as you know, he was the one appointed by Jesus as head of the church. And when he started, immediately after the coming of the Spirit upon them on Pentecost Sunday, Peter really takes over the leadership of this infant church, and he gives several major speeches. But basically, keep in mind that he is talking to Jewish people. Other than I think it's in around chapter 10 or 11, he ends up at the house of an individual called Cornelius. Cornelius was a Gentile. He was a pagan, and actually, by the time it's a long-winded story. By the time he's finished, he has converted this pagan to Christianity, Cornelius and his household, and that in a sense brings us on to Paul. We know the story of Paul already, that he was a devout. He hated Christians. He hated the new, what we call the new way, the new religion, and he did his best to, in a sense, imprison Christians. And it was in that context we know that he was actually, I was going to say, knocked off his horse. He had an experience of the risen Christ, and from that experience, of course, Paul, who had been a pagan, becomes a Christian, and straight away, as soon as he's catechized, if you will, then he starts his mission to Jews and Gentiles. But what he finds is, as he starts his mission to Jews and Gentiles, after a while, some of the Jewish converts start to complain, because this says, how does a Gentile become a Christian? Does he not have to become a Jew first? Does he not have to do what we've had to do in order to become Jews? So that becomes a very controversial issue. And that is the issue that is dealt with at the first council of the church in Jerusalem in the year 50. The question, of course, being how does a pagan become a Christian? Does he need to become a Jew first to go through all the circumcision, number one, and number two, does he have to obey the Jewish purity laws, etc., in order to become a Christian? So that was the issue that was sort of dealt with, and obviously it had two different sides to the issue. And of course, the way in which it was finally resolved was that the pagans didn't have to go through didn't have to be circumcised, didn't have to obey those Jewish purity laws in order to become a Christian. All they needed to do to become a Christian, obviously, like everybody else, was to be baptized. Anyhow, that was the decision, but I think the key point with regard to the decision, and not just this decision, but almost every decision in the Acts of the Apostles, the key point is that they were very aware of the fact that the decision was really due to the influence and the activity of the Holy Spirit in their lives. It was a decision made under the guidance of the Spirit. And that was true not just of this decision, but as you go through the Acts of the Apostles and the success of the early church, that infant church starting in Jerusalem, time and again they would say that it was the Holy Spirit that guided them to do what kind of missionary activity they did. It was the Spirit that guided them. So I suppose the message from these readings for Sunday is we've all been given the Spirit. The Holy Spirit has been given to us in baptism and confirmation. And to what extent do we experience the presence of the Spirit in our lives at this point in time? If we do, congratulations. If we don't, then know that He is still with you. But there is the danger that the Spirit sort of is within you but is dormant. So somehow the Spirit within you needs to be brought back to life, and perhaps the more you surrender your life to Christ, I think it's in and through that experience that God's Holy Spirit is allowed to operate. Thank you. Have a good day, and God bless.